All right, so today we're going to dive into this really interesting artist, blood.twin. They're a solo goth artist from London. And, I was listening to their stuff getting ready for this.
Yeah.
And I got to say, like, it's some really, really good modern goth music. And it really kind of spans,
Right.
all these different subgenres of goth. So it's like post-punk and dark wave and cold waves and like traditional death rock, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, you get a little bit of that EBM industrial, even some like gothic metal influences in there too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very much like if you are into goth music at all,
Right.
You're probably going to find something to love here.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's got that kind of like classic dark romanticism, but it's also got this really modern edge to it, with the dense synth work and the cinematic soundscapes.
For sure. And there's just something really cool about like an artist who can just kind of like blend all these different things together. And it's not just like throwing things at the wall.
Yeah, it feels very intentional.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels very intentional and it works. And it's like, it's sonically interesting. It's lyrically interesting. So, we're excited to like dig into this.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting too is this whole kind of like, genesis of the project.
Yeah.
It's not your typical band origin story.
Yeah, like reading through the background and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It seems like this artist just kind of like came to goth kind of in a roundabout way.
Yeah, it's funny because, they were saying that like back in 1999 there was this BBC documentary called Young Guns Go For It.
Okay.
And it was showcasing like, the New Romantics movement.
Right.
And electronic pioneers like, Human League, New Order, that kind of stuff. And the artist was saying that like that was what kind of first got them interested in this kind of music.
Interesting.
And so, they started experimenting with like sampling and remixing and stuff like that, just like on basic PC software.
Yeah, it's funny how like something that you just kind of like happen to see can just totally change the course of your life.
Right. And it's like, they said that kind of led them to punk. And then from punk, they got into like the Smiths and the Cure and Joy Division.
Right.
So it's like this kind of like natural progression.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like I feel like that's a pretty common kind of pathway for a lot of people,
For sure.
You start with something and then it leads you to something else.
Totally.
But so, I mean, it sounds like they had this like pretty wide range of influences.
It's interesting because they were saying that even before that, they had been listening to like classic rock and pop. So like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Queen and Bowie.
Sure.
So it's like they had this really broad base to work with.
Right. So they already had that kind of like musical foundation. And then they found like all these other sounds that they were like, oh, this is even cooler. This is like darker, edgier.
Exactly.
More, whatever.
Yeah. And they were saying they had a bunch of like, ill-fated failed band attempts.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But like all that time that they spent just kind of like making music for themselves was really important.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like I feel like that's such a crucial part of anyone's musical journey, You
got to experiment, you got to fail, you got to learn from your mistakes.
Exactly.
And it seems like they did a lot of that. And they also mentioned a collaboration with like a pre-horrors lineup.
Oh, wow.
Which I thought was really interesting.
I wonder what that sounds like.
I know, right?
Yeah, that's cool. So like, I mean, it's interesting to hear about like the origin story.
Yeah.
But like, what do you think is like driving this artist? Like, why do you think?
I think that's a really good question. And like, from what I was reading, it seems like, they have this need to express like the darker side of life,
Okay.
And often it's like a response to like negativity in the world.
Right.
And it's interesting because they have a background in theater.
Oh, okay.
But they were saying that music became like their truest form of expression. And that they actually rediscovered their creativity through visual art before coming back to music.
Wow. So it's like they've kind of been through this like
a whole journey
of like finding their voice.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I think is really cool.
I do too.
So yeah, I mean that's really interesting. And speaking of like finding their voice, the name blood.twin, like how did that?
Well, that's actually a funny story because it sounds like it kind of came about almost by accident.
Really?
So they had released a song called My Fried Brain.
Okay.
Under the name Net.Fraley.
Net.Fraley.
Which is also very interesting.
Very cool. Very cool.
But so they put that song out and it really resonated with people.
Okay.
And so they decided to kind of like, make blood.twin this like more focused project.
Right. So it's like My Fried Brain was kind of like the
Yeah, like the catalyst.
The seed
Totally.
that grew into this blood.twin project.
Exactly. And I think that name blood.twin it really speaks to like what they're trying to do with their music.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like this kind of exploration of the unease and the beauty that can be found in like the chaos of life.
Right, right. It's very evocative, you know.
For sure.
It immediately makes you think of something.
Yeah.
So what do they want to achieve with their music? Like, what's the...
Well, they're really trying to give voice to like anxieties and uncertainties, you know,
Right.
the things that we all kind of feel but don't always talk about.
Sure.
And they're hoping that by sharing their own experiences through music, that listeners will, you know, kind of embrace those feelings and feel less alone.
Right. Like, it's this idea that we're all kind of in this together.
Exactly. And I think that's really powerful, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
And they see music as a catharsis for both themselves and for the listener.
Okay. It's like a two-way street.
Exactly.
Cool. Yeah. So let's talk about the music itself. Like, how would you describe the blood.twin sound?
Oh, man. How do you even begin to describe it?
Well, you know, like we were talking about before, I mean, like, if you're into goth music at all, like, I feel like you're going to find something to, like, hear.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For
Yeah.
sure. I mean, it's definitely got that, like, you know, that post-punk and that dark wave and that goth influence. Like,
Right.
it's all there.
For sure. And it's got that kind of, like, beauty and unease thing going on.
Yes, exactly. And I think a good example of that is, like, the track Dark Bloodlands.
Okay.
Like, it's got these driving synths and these evocative instrumentals.
Right.
You know, it's familiar, but it's also kind of otherworldly. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like you hear it and you're like, oh, yeah, I've heard this before, but, like, not quite like this.
Exactly. And there are these little hints of, like, neo-psych in there, too.
Interesting.
Which is really cool.
Yeah. So there's this, like, familiarity, but then there's also, like...
That unique twist.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, their own spin on it.
For sure. And what I really appreciate about their production is, like, the clarity and focus.
Okay.
You know, it's not just about creating, like, this dense atmosphere.
Right.
It's about making sure that, like, the emotional weight and the lyrical content really cut through.
Right. It's not just, like, noise for noise's sake.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have described their sound as, like, a captivating blend of dark wave, post-punk, and goth influences.
Sure.
And I think that's really accurate.
Yeah. And I've seen some other descriptions, too, that I thought were really interesting.
Like what?
Like, someone described it as, like, a psych goth sound,
Oh, wow.
which I thought was kind of cool. Like, imagine the Sisters of Mercy, but, like,
Okay.
on acid.
Whoa.
And then, like, mixed with the anger of Ministry or Nine Inch Nails.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah. And then also people talk about, like, the cinematic soundscapes.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, the really dense atmospheric synth work.
Yes, definitely. And I think that all comes together to create this really immersive listening experience.
Totally. So let's talk about this upcoming album.
Yeah.
Demas.
I love that title, by the way.
Yeah, it's really cool. So it sounds like this is going to be like kind of a collection of older stuff.
Yeah, it's being described as like a curated anthology of early singles and B-sides and remixes.
Okay.
And it's interesting because they're positioning it as like the definitive first chapter.
Oh, cool.
You know, so it's like a way to kind of like get a comprehensive overview of like their foundational years.
Yeah. So even though it's like looking back, it's also kind of like a way to
Understand where they're at now.
to textualize like where they are now.
Exactly.
Cool. So and then there's also this new single.
Yes.
Was It a Dream?
Was it a dream?
Yeah.
Which I gotta say, I was listening to that and I was like, this is a banger.
It's a really good track.
It's so good. So what can you tell us about Was It a Dream?
Well, it delves into like this space between reality and the subconscious.
Okay.
And, you know, uses a lot of like gothic imagery and metaphors of vampirism
Right.
to explore these themes of like existential dread,
Oh,
fragmented identity, and like being haunted by your own imagination. So it's like all the fun stuff.
all the good stuff.
The good stuff, yeah. And musically, like what were they going for with this?
Well, you know, it blends like that 80s post-punk sound
Okay.
with these like stark electro textures
Right.
and that signature melancholic goth dark wave, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
And it's interesting because it's like energetic, but it's also really melancholic.
Right. Like that push and pull.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I thought it was interesting, like the use of the vampirism theme. Like it's such a classic goth trope,
Totally.
but it's also like, you know, it can be interpreted in so many different ways.
Yeah, it's really versatile.
Yeah. Like it's about power and vulnerability and like
Yeah.
blurring the lines between life and death.
Exactly. And that really ties into like that whole introspective nature of Darkwave's music, you know?
Right.
It's about looking inward and exploring those like darker parts of yourself.
For sure. And this single is premiering
Yes.
at Bats in the Attic.
Bats in the Attic. That's right.
In Mesa, Arizona.
Mesa, Arizona on March 29th.
March 29th, 2025.
2025.
At midnight.
Midnight Mountain Standard Time.
And then it'll be released publicly.
It's 7:10 GMT,
Okay.
which is like 12:10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time.
Gotcha. So very soon.
Very soon, yeah.
So you can actually pre-order it now on Bandcamp.
Yeah, go check it out.
So going back to this single,
Yeah.
like what was the motivation behind this?
Well, they were saying that they really wanted to like explore those blurred lines between reality and the subconscious, you know,
Okay.
and those liminal spaces of like memory and nightmares.
Right.
And they're using like the vampirism and the undead as metaphors for like existential dread and this like fractured identity.
So it's like
Yeah.
taking those classic themes
Yeah,
and
right.
like giving them a new spin.
Absolutely. And they were aiming to convey like this feeling of disorientation
Okay.
through like gothic horror imagery and this sense of being consumed by darkness.
Oh, fun.
And musically, they were going for like this really energetic and raw sound that blends 80s post-punk and electro and goth rock and dark wave and even like these Morricone-esque synths.
Wow.
So it's like this danceable but also melancholic and thought-provoking experience.
That's a lot to pack into one song.
They do a good job, though.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So looking ahead, like what else can we expect from blood.twin?
Well, they were going to be releasing more singles leading up to the Demas album.
Okay.
And then they're also planning on doing more net.frail singles.
Oh, cool.
And they're working on producing their partner's album.
Okay.
They're doing some remixes for Friend.
Nice.
And they're even talking about collaborations.
Cool. So it sounds like they're going to be pretty busy.
Oh, yeah. They're keeping themselves busy for sure.
Awesome. And one thing that I thought was really cool was that they were talking about how much they appreciate the support from the online community,
Oh, yeah.
which I think is really important for like independent artists. You
Yeah.
know, it's like that's your fan base. That's your
Yeah, that's your lifeline.
yeah.
For sure.
So yeah, I mean it's really cool to see that they're like acknowledging that.
Definitely.
So yeah, like overall I'm just really impressed with Blood Twin. You know, it's like they're creating this really immersive and relatable experience for listeners.
Absolutely. And I think the fact that they're premiering Was It a Dream
Yeah.
at Bats in the Attic
Right.
really shows like their connection to
Yeah.
the goth community.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, I think it's just really inspiring to see an artist who's like, you know, they started out just like messing around with samples in their bedroom.
Yeah.
And now they're creating this like really distinct and resonant artistic voice.
Yeah. And they've really come into their own. you know?
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
like they're not afraid to experiment.
Exactly.
They're not afraid to like push boundaries.
And they're doing it in a way that's like both familiar and fresh. You know?
Right. It's like they're taking these like classic gothic themes
Yeah.
and like giving them a modern sonic update.
Totally.
So yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see what they do next.
Me too.
And you know, like thinking about all this,
Yeah.
like, I think it's really interesting to consider like what are those unexpected moments in our own lives
Right.
that could spark our own creative journeys.
Like those fried brain moments
Nah,
that lead to something amazing.
yeah, because it's like you never know where inspiration's going to come from.
Totally.
So yeah, I mean that's something to think about as you're listening to blood.twin.
Absolutely.
So thanks for taking this deep dive with us,
Of course.
and we'll catch you next time.